My local high school is having prom this year, and one of the things that they wanted to use for decoration is a light up prom sign that you can take photos in front of. So they looked into renting them and was kind of shocked to find out that it would be $900 to rent. Well, I'm going to make a prom sign in this video, and I'm only charging materials cost. I'm kind of donating my labor to the local community, so it's a way for me to give back a little bit, and it's also a way for them to get something that they can physically keep and use year after year if they want to. So the hardest part of this project is the design work. Actually building it, there's nothing to building it. It's very, very basic, but designing it was kind of a time-consuming process because once we figured out the height for the letters, I wanted to kind of get as much height as we could on the width of a sheet. We settled for 46 inches in height. But the problem, or the time-consuming part, was spacing out the lights so that you had this balance or this symmetry for everything. And how far do you space the lights? Well, it depends on the size of the bulbs. We ended up going with, if I'm not mistaken, a 7-inch spacing on all this, which for these lights, I think I could have gotten a little bit tighter spacing, but I was also kind of worried about using too many lights and then not having enough sockets in the string lights that was purchased. So a lot of little tweaks here and there. That was the most time-consuming thing. But once the design was done, we could actually start on cutting the material. Melamine is the material of choice for two very specific reasons. Number one is the budget. We're trying to save as much money as possible, and comparatively speaking, melamine is one of the lesser expensive sheet goods. Number two, assuming you're okay with the exposed edges, then melamine is a great material to use in the fact that it doesn't require additional labor input like finishing. It's ready to go right after the machining process. So that's why we went with melamine. I do not have a vacuum table on this machine. So if you are interested in getting a CNC machine and you think you're going towards the production side of things, you have to consider a vacuum table. I don't do production work, so it's okay for me to not have to worry about that. I just use one screw per corner, and for the most part, it works out quite well with just screws. As you'll see, I made a boo-boo down the road, which we'll get to. But the first sheet was mainly letters, a few rectangles, so it didn't take long to cut it all. And then, of course, there is a little bit of tab cutting labor involved. I don't have a vacuum table, like I said, so I use tabs to hold the pieces together as it's cut, and then I can use an oscillating tool to cut those tabs and release the pieces. Right off the machine, the tabs have to be removed, and I use a flush trim bit for this. Now, I dedicated this lever router lift that I made for a flush trim station, and I do that because of this right here. It's next to the table saw, so I have a lot of really wide material support so that, for example, these letters, I can very easily cut all the tabs and not have to fumble around with holding up this big sheet or this big object up off in space while I'm trying to flush trim these tabs. This extra work surface really is a treat for a flush trimming station. I had two boo-boos on the CNC machine, as my daughter would say, boo-boos. Mistakes, mess-ups. First off, I placed 4 rectangles that were too close, and I ended up cutting through the tabs, cut through all the material support, and then of course the pieces shift. So that's a big mistake. Luckily it was at the beginning, relative beginning of the program, so I was able to stop it, change the vector, move some stuff around, and put them in some of the wasted space and get them cut. So the rest of the wasted space was just a bunch of stars that we decided on using to fill up the extra part of the sheet, and those will be used for decoration. After cutting that, or restarting that, I did have one more rectangle that messed up, and unfortunately this was the very last vector, so I couldn't use any more of that scrap to recut this because I'd already used it to cut up all those extra stars. For this particular piece, it's an easy fix though with some other scraps, and it's a rectangle, so I could use the table saw to just cut it out really easily out of the scraps. 1 million tabs, that's what I have on my notes here as I'm doing this narration. It sure felt like 1 million tabs. Each one of these stars had, if I'm not mistaken, I had it set for a minimum of 4 tabs, and some of the bigger stars had 6 or 8 tabs. So there was a lot of a lot of tab cutting, and then it's just rinse and repeat for all of the tabs at the router table. Onto the assembly process. Now each letter gets a box built on the bottom back side, and that box is what's used to kind of counterbalance it and hold it vertical. I don't want these to fall, obviously, and they're only 3/4 of an inch thick, the letters are, so that's not enough of an edge to allow it to stay vertical. So each letter gets a box, and I wanted to reduce confusion and the opportunity for error, so I laid out every one of the letters, all of the box components in the orientation in which they will be assembled, so that way I can very easily grab and cut the pocket holes in the correct orientation. Now this particular pocket hole machine is a low angle pocket hole machine, and the whole point of a low angle pocket hole is to kind of make assembly a little bit easier, because it reduces shifting, especially when doing stuff like face frames and such. In this case, I'm not really seeing much of that benefit because melamine is just so darn slick, so I still had to clamp all the pieces together. Now most of the letters are super easy to knock out in this way. You just cut all the pocket holes, clamp it together, or clamp the box structure together, and then secure it to the back of the letter. Goes by really quick. But the O in Prom, the letter O, it had to be assembled vertically because there was no flat spot on the bottom of the letter. There's no way I could just kind of eyeball this on the table and make sure that it is, it's going to be vertical. So I set the letters up side by side and sandwiched the letter O in between two letters, and then installed the box as is on the floor. And that worked out pretty well. Here's the first layout of all the pieces stuck together, and you can get a better idea for the size of the project at this point. It's quite long, actually. I wasn't expecting it to be this long. I had to get out my wide-angle lens so that I could fit it all in the shot. The easiest way to do all the electrical with this is to get a string light kit and cut it up as needed, and that's what I recommended. That's what they bought and brought to me. So when I first saw this, my initial thought was, oh goodness, those light bulbs are pretty tiny. I was picturing a little bit bigger bulbs, but this ended up working out all right. Now the size of the holes for the sockets in the melamine, I chose to go a little bit on the large side. That way I didn't have to fuss at all with these sockets fitting if there's any variance in the size of the sockets. And I didn't really have a plan on attaching it, so it's kind of a figure out as I go thing. And what I figured out, or what I decided to do, was to put the socket through, put the bulb in place, and then position the bulb flush into the circle. So push it down as far as it can go. That'll center the socket in the hole, and then I can secure the socket with some hot melt glue on the back side. With a game plan in place, string the lights all the way through the letters, cut everything as needed, install the bulbs, which, man, that took forever putting all these bulbs in here, and I had to put them in and take them out a couple different times. And then finally push the bulb back, secure the socket with some hot melt glue, rinse and repeat over and over and over and over. And here we are, it's done, and I'm going to show you off and on, of course, to show that it all works. But I kind of just skipped right through the electrical. It's kind of monotonous and kind of boring, but every one of these is done the same way. I'll go to the back side. You'll see I have an extension cord right here for power. Every letter has a male plug in the bottom right. If you're looking at the back, bottom right will have a male plug. So I'll plug in right here for power. Power will go through all the lights, and then it terminates right here where I spliced in some more wire and a female plug. So in this orientation here, this setup, it's just draped into some of the stapled wire, so that way during storage this will plug into itself and all the wires are kind of contained and not dangling anywhere, because this female end is a little bit long, and it's left long on purpose so that it can go through that hole down there. Female plug will come through here into the next letter, where this letter gets its power source, plugs in right there. Again, it goes through the same thing, through the whole letter. And in this one, I've already plugged it in, so I've got the female end. The extra can just be tucked down into these boxes. Female end will come out of this hole, out of this, into this hole, where it plugs into this male plug. I also added a little sticker to the back of every one of these boxes. Now these boxes are here just because this particular design, I don't want it to fall forward, so you can put a brick in every one of these. And just as it is without any weight, they're pretty solid. Of course, you don't want to bump into them or anything. It's just kind of a photo op, really. But let's plug them all in and see what it looks like. I haven't tested this, so hopefully don't have any busted bulbs or anything. And I am 5'6". These letters are 46 inches tall, so you can kind of get a size comparison or an idea for the size in that regard. P plugs into R, and then R plugs into O. O plugs into M, which, did I already have them all plugged in? I do. All right, so it looks like we have a couple dead bulbs. Oh, maybe they're not dead. All right. One thing that I do wish I could have or would have done differently is the boxes on the back side. I wish I would have used something like black melamine or something that wasn't white, because if you're looking at an angle, sometimes it, depending on which way you look, especially on the P, the white box behind it kind of looks like it's part of the letter and it kind of goes to the back, which it's not. It's supposed to be separate. So there's that. This was a budget build, tried to reduce costs for our local high school rather than renting them. The rental price for one of these setups, not exactly like this, probably a little bit better than this, was like $900, to where this instead is something that they get to keep, and materials cost was a little less than $200. Also, because these are kind of chained together, next year is obviously not the year of 22. So we can either cut a 3 and add it to it, or simply disconnect the two numbers, and then you have this that you can use every year going forward.